Kelvin Adeyemi was the kind of man Lagos respected. In his early 30s, tall, well-built, and confident, he carried himself with the aura of a man who had conquered life. His business empire stretched across the city, real estate, tech investments, and a fleet of luxury cars that announced his arrival long before he stepped into a room. But it wasn't just his wealth that made people notice him. It was the way he spoke, the way he charmed, and the way he led. Beside him stood Anita, his wife. If Kelvin was power, Anita was grace. She was a woman everyone admired, elegant, fashionable, and intelligent. Anita had built her own name as a corporate lawyer, and together they became what many called the city's golden couple. They were the kind of pair people pointed at during social events, whispering, "That's what success looks like." Their love story seemed flawless. They had met 5 years earlier at a business conference in Victoria Island, where Kelvin had been a guest speaker. Anita, still rising in her career, had asked a sharp question during his presentation, and instead of being intimidated, Kelvin had been impressed. From that moment, admiration blossomed into friendship, friendship into love, and love into marriage. Their union was the stuff of magazines. Their wedding had filled social media with pictures of glistening chandeliers, designer gowns, and guests from the highest corners of society. Now, living in a high-rise apartment overlooking the city lights, their life appeared perfect. Every morning, they shared breakfast at a marble dining table, Anita in her silk blouses, Kelvin in his tailored suits. On weekends, they attended charity galas, held hands during red carpet moments, and smiled for the cameras. Behind closed doors, they enjoyed laughter, shared dreams of building a family, and whispered about plans for the future. To the outside world, theirs was a marriage made in heaven. To themselves, it felt like destiny fulfilled. But in Lagos, where stories are written in shadows as much as in light, destiny often has a way of reminding people that the past is never truly gone. And far away, in a modest apartment tucked in a quieter part of the city, lived Sophia, a woman with her own story tied to Kelvin's name. She was not in the spotlight, not dressed in designer gowns, not gracing the front pages of glossy magazines. But she carried something far more permanent than wealth or status, a child who bore Kelvin's blood. For now, Sophia lived quietly, raising her son with patience and strength. She had not yet stepped back into Kelvin's glittering world. But as the city light shimmered at night, fate prepared to weave their paths together again. And when it did, everything Anita thought she knew about her perfect life would be tested. Sophia's life could not have been more different from Anita's. While Anita dressed in designer gowns and drove sleek cars, Sophia lived modestly in a small 2-bedroom apartment. Her days were filled with simple routines, waking up early, preparing breakfast, rushing to her job as a fashion boutique attendant, and returning home to care for her 6-year-old son, David. David was the center of her world. His laughter was her music, and his questions kept her spirit alive. People often asked who his father was, for the boy carried a striking resemblance to a man of influence. Sophia rarely answered. She had grown used to swallowing her truth, smiling through the curiosity of others. Only in the silence of her room did she whisper the name Kelvin Adeyemi, the man she once loved, the man who had promised her forever but left her for another. It wasn't bitterness that guided Sophia's heart. Life had taught her to be strong, to survive without leaning on a man. Yet, raising a child in Lagos was no easy task, and though she worked hard, there were nights she wished Kelvin would step into David's life, if only to offer the boy the fatherly love he deserved. Sophia hadn't seen Kelvin in years, though she occasionally saw his face on billboards or in the business pages of newspapers. Each time, her heart reminded her of what they once shared, a love that burned with intensity, only to be extinguished by ambition and choices she never understood. But while she tried to bury her past, her son's growing questions made it impossible. David had begun asking about his father, and Sophia knew, sooner or later, the truth would no longer stay hidden. For now, she kept her distance, watching from afar as Kelvin's marriage to Anita glistened like gold. But the city has a way of crossing paths, no matter how far apart they seem. And soon, Sophia's quiet world would collide with Anita's perfect one, sparking a storm that would shake everything in its path. Life continued smoothly for Kelvin and Anita. They attended business dinners, posed for photographs, and spent weekends in luxury. Yet, within Anita's heart, a quiet emptiness began to grow. She loved her husband deeply, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Their talks about having children often ended in silence, and Kelvin always seemed too distracted to linger on the subject. At first, Anita brushed it off as work stress. She knew Kelvin was ambitious, and success demanded sacrifices. But when late nights at the office became more frequent, and his phone calls always seemed private, Anita's instincts whispered questions she tried hard to silence. The whispers grew stronger one afternoon when she overheard two women at a salon casually gossiping about Kelvin. One of them mentioned seeing him speaking warmly with another woman in a cafe, a woman with a child. Anita laughed it off in front of them, pretending not to care, but the words stuck in her mind like thorns. That night, as she lay beside Kelvin in their expansive bedroom, she looked at him differently. His sleep seemed too peaceful, his breathing too steady, as if no secrets lived beneath his chest. But Anita knew better. She was a lawyer. She had built a career on noticing the small details others missed. For the first time, suspicion crept into her perfect life. It was faint, like a shadow at sunset. But shadows have a way of growing darker with time. Kelvin had never planned to see Sophia again. Their past was one he believed he had buried. Youthful passion, reckless promises, and a love that once consumed him. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. One Saturday morning, as he left his office to grab a quick breakfast at a quiet cafe, he froze. Across the room, sitting with a little boy who looked strikingly familiar, was Sophia. Time seemed to stop for Kelvin. The years melted away, and all he could see was a woman he once loved, and the child, his child, staring back at him with innocent eyes. Sophia met his gaze, and for a moment, neither spoke. There was no need. The truth was written clearly in the boy's face. From that day, everything changed. Kelvin's visits to the cafe became frequent. At first, it was excuses, business meetings, quick lunches, but in reality, he was drawn to his son. He bought toys, paid school fees quietly, and slipped money into Sophia's hands, asking her to use it for David's future. Sophia accepted, not out of greed, but because she knew her son deserved more than she could provide alone. But with every visit, old emotions stirred. Sophia had never truly stopped loving Kelvin, though she had trained herself to live without him. His presence reignited memories of their laughter, their struggles, and their nights together in the early days before wealth and ambition tore them apart. Kelvin, too, found himself caught in a dangerous web, torn between his loyalty to Anita and the undeniable bond he felt with Sophia and David. For a while, Anita noticed nothing. Her world remained intact, filled with social events, candlelit dinners, and loving smiles from her husband. But beneath the surface, a fire had been lit, a fire that threatened to consume everything once the smoke reached her eyes. Lagos is a city that talks. Secrets do not remain secrets for long, not when there are eyes watching and lips eager to share. Soon, whispers began to spread about Kelvin, a man spotted at a cafe too often, laughing with a woman who wasn't his wife, a child who bore his striking resemblance. These whispers traveled from salons to bars, from corporate offices to private gatherings, until they found their way to Anita's ears. Anita dismissed the first rumor. After all, gossip was a heartbeat of the city. People loved to create drama where none existed. But when the whispers became frequent, she felt a gnawing ache in her chest. Her friends would lower their voices when she walked into a room. Colleagues gave her sympathetic glances. She began to feel like the last person in Lagos to know a truth that everyone else already did. One evening, as Anita scrolled through her phone, a picture popped up on social media. A grainy image, but enough to sting. Kelvin, leaning down to tie the shoelaces of a small boy while Sophia watched with a smile. It wasn't a romantic photo, but it told a story Anita didn't want to believe. That night, she couldn't sleep. The city lights flickered outside her window, but inside her heart, darkness spread. She remembered the vows she had exchanged with Kelvin, the promises of forever, the dreams they had built together. Were they all a lie, or was she imagining shadows where there were none? Anita told herself she would confront him soon. But confrontation required courage, and courage needed timing. For now, she kept her silence, waiting for the right moment to demand the truth. The truth always finds a way of surfacing, and for Anita, it came crashing one quiet evening. Kelvin had returned home later than usual, the faint scent of baby powder lingering on his shirt. Anita's sharp eyes noticed it instantly. She said nothing during dinner, but her silence was heavier than any words. When Kelvin finally sat down to relax, Anita turned to him with steady eyes. She asked only one question: "Who is Sophia?" Kelvin's heart dropped. He had rehearsed many excuses over the past months, but hearing her speak the name he tried so hard to hide stripped him of words. He looked at her, guilt written across his face, and in that silence, Anita had her answer. The confrontation that followed shook their home. Anita demanded the truth, and Kelvin confessed not everything, but enough. He admitted Sophia was his past, that David was his son, and that he had been helping them quietly. He tried to explain it was about responsibility, not betrayal, but Anita heard none of it. To her, it wasn't just about a child. It was about trust, loyalty, and respect. He had built a life with her on half-truths, all while sharing another piece of himself with someone else. Anita's heart broke that night, not because of Sophia, but because of Kelvin's silence. In the city below, cars honked, music played, and life went on. But inside the Adeyemi penthouse, a marriage that once looked unshakable began to crumble under the weight of betrayal. While Anita's world was collapsing, Sophia's was shifting too. She had not expected Kelvin to confess to his wife so soon. In fact, she never imagined herself as a threat to his marriage. All she wanted was a better life for her son. But as weeks passed, Sophia began to feel the pull of old emotions. The more time Kelvin spent with David, the harder it became to separate responsibility from affection. Sophia started to dream again of a world where she and Kelvin were together, raising their child under one roof. She knew it was selfish, but the heart is rarely logical. Every time she saw him, every time David called him daddy, a piece of her longed for the life they might have had. It didn't take long before her friends began to encourage her. They reminded her of her history with Kelvin, how Anita was the outsider, the intruder into a love that once belonged to her. Their words planted seeds in her heart, seed that grew into a quiet determination. One evening, as Kelvin prepared to leave her apartment, Sophia finally said a word she had been holding back. She told him she still loved him. She told him David deserved a complete family. And she told him she wasn't willing to be in the shadows forever. Kelvin left that night torn in two, carrying a storm inside him. For the first time, Sophia wasn't just a mother of his child. She had become a force demanding recognition, and Kelvin knew he couldn't avoid the war that was coming. Anita had always been a woman of dignity, and betrayal did not strip her of it. In the weeks following Kelvin's confession, she found herself drowning in pain, but she refused to let the city see her weakness. She attended events with her head held high, smiled for cameras, and continued her work with unwavering focus. But inside, she was fighting to hold herself together. Her friends advised her to leave him. Some even sent her the numbers of divorce lawyers. But Anita wasn't quick to make decisions. She believed in vows, in fighting for what was hers. Yet, she also knew that forgiveness could not come easily. Trust, once broken, required more than apologies to be rebuilt. Anita decided to confront Sophia, not with anger, but with strength. She arranged a private meeting, choosing a quiet cafe where eyes and ears were fewer. When Sophia arrived, Anita looked her straight in the eyes. The meeting was civil, but it was also a warning. Anita made it clear that she was Kelvin's wife, that she had built a life with him, and that she would not surrender easily. Sophia listened quietly, but deep down, her resolve only hardened. The city was now a battlefield between two women, both fighting for the same man, both unwilling to let go. And at the center of it all stood Kelvin, a man drowning in choices he never thought he would have to make. The tension reached its peak one rainy evening. Anita had packed a small bag, ready to leave the penthouse. She could no longer bear the silence, the arguments, the feeling of betrayal that haunted every corner of their home. Kelvin begged her to stay, swearing he would fix everything, but Anita's tears spoke louder than his words. Meanwhile, Sophia grew bolder. She called Kelvin more often, reminded him of his responsibilities, and painted pictures of the life they could have as a family. Her words tempted him, not because he had stopped loving Anita, but because the guilt of abandoning his son weighed heavily on his heart. Kelvin's world spiraled. His business began to suffer from his distractions. Friends noticed his absence, and the man who once seemed untouchable now looked fragile. For the first time in his life, he realized he could lose everything: his marriage, his reputation, his peace. That night, standing on his balcony with the city lights stretching endlessly before him, Kelvin knew he had reached a breaking point. He could no longer live in two worlds. A decision had to be made. But whichever choice he made, someone's heart would shatter. The morning after the storm, Kelvin made his choice. He asked Anita to meet him at the very cafe where it all began, the place where he had first met Sophia again. Anita arrived, her eyes heavy with sadness but her spirit unbroken. Kelvin spoke with honesty for the first time. He confessed everything, not just about Sophia and David, but about his confusion, his guilt, and his weakness. He told her he still loved her, that she was a woman he wanted to spend his life with, but he also admitted that his son needed him too. Anita listened quietly, her heart torn between love and disappointment. She saw the sincerity in Kelvin's eyes, but she also knew the scars he had left behind would take years to heal. In the end, she made her decision. She chose to forgive him, not because she had forgotten, but because she believed love was worth fighting for. But she gave him a warning: trust would never come easy again. He would have to earn it every single day. As for Sophia, she accepted her place with grace. She realized Kelvin's heart belonged to Anita, and no amount of history could change that. Her role, she understood, was to raise her son with pride, giving him all the love she had. She and Kelvin agreed to co-parent, not as lovers, but as partners in David's life. The city moved on, as it always did. Cars honked, lights flickered, and gossip shifted to new stories. But for the Adeyemis, life was never the same again. They had walked through betrayal, faced heartbreak, and chosen forgiveness. Their love story was no longer flawless, but it was real, and in a city like Lagos, sometimes that was enough. Please, if you enjoy watching this video, please subscribe, like, share, and comment if you want to get notified on our next video.